from IIT Madras. He is a professor in the Department of Management Studies, IIT Madras. He received his BE Honours from Anna University, Madras. Later MS and PhD from IIT Madras. His NPTEL video courses, Fundamentals of Operations Research, which consists of 22 video lectures, had a total viewership of 20 lakhs. And Advanced Operations Research, which consists of 39 video lectures, had a total viewership of 15 lakhs. So they are so popular. There is none other from Professor G. Srinivasan to teach you simplex and the associated topics. And he has also authored a book on operations research principles and applications, which went for second edition, and quantitative models in operations and supply chain management, both published by Pratex Hall India. He has done a lot of industrial consultation. He was awarded the Boys Scout Fellowship in the Ministry of Science and Technology. We are very happy that you could be here today, sir. Thank you.
I'll be doing two topics today. One is the simplex algorithm and the other is the maximum flow problem. Both these also have roots from operations research, particularly the simplex algorithm. Maximum flow problem kind of finds place in both computer science literature as well as in the operations research literature. I'm more of a trained operations research person than a computer science person. I'll try my best to kind of take you through and tell you a little bit about how to implement these algorithms as well. But I'll be concentrating more on what these algorithms are, particularly with respect to simplex, what is the maximum flow problem and how we solve that. And then we will touch upon how to write computer programs and how to implement algorithms to solve the maximum flow problem. So first we'll look at the simplex algorithm, and you can also feel free to stop me at some point in case you have a question or you feel that I'm moving a bit too fast to your liking. So these are the things that we will do today for about an hour and 15 minutes, I guess. So we'll do that. So we'll first start with what is a linear programming problem. I have to position it at the beginning level, so I cannot assume that most of you would know what a linear programming problem is. So we'll start from the definition of a linear programming problem. Then I will look at simplex and describe it in what is called the algebraic form, which is the easy to understand form. Then we will talk about worth of the resource and the dual of the linear programming problem and how simplex solves the dual as well. Then we will look at the tabular form of simplex, which is usually the way it is taught in class, in colleges and other institutions. Tabular form is a form which is easy to do by hand. The algebraic form is easy to understand. The tabular form is easy to do by hand, so that it is done in class and taught to students. And then we look at the matrix form, which is where exactly you look at simplex and how to write a computer program for simplex. So you have to use the matrix form. And then what are the variations, what are the limitations of simplex, and what are computational issues in simplex. This is what we will try to cover for this session. So this is well known. Simplex algorithm is used to solve a linear programming problem. So any problem that can be formulated can be written as a linear programming problem. You can use the simplex algorithm to solve it. In case you have done a course on operations research before, normally when it is taught in class, you do a graphical method and then you do an algebraic method and then you do the simplex method. So today we are not going to do the graphical and algebraic and all that. We'll come straight to the simplex. But before that, what is a linear programming problem? It is solving a linear programming problem, but then what is a linear programming problem? So what is a linear programming problem? To do that, we take a very small example. I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes trying to tell you what is a linear programming. So we will say a company can make 3 products. You can call them ABC, PQR, whatever you want to call them. And these can be sold at 250, 180 and 300 rupees per unit. You need 2 machines to make them. So the first machine you require 10 minutes, 12 minutes, 15 minutes for A, B and C, the 3 products. The 3 products also go to a second machine. Remember, they also go to a second machine. And the time per unit on the second machine is 24, 14 and 20. So these 2 machines are available. Just for the sake of differentiation, you can assume that 1 machine of the first type is available and 2 machines of the second type are available. You can say that this manufacturing thing works 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, so 2,400 minutes. Right? 8 hours a day, 5 days a week is 40 hours a week. Into 60 gives you 2,400 minutes are available on M1 and 4,800 minutes are available on M6. You can also assume again in very simple terms that whatever you produce you can sell. And when you sell you get this 250, 180 and 300 for the 3 products per year. The simple question is, how much do we produce of the 3 products? Is the simple question, which we try to answer. The 3 products as X1, X2, X3 of the 3 products, you can call them PQR, that are being made. So I make X1 of the first product, X2 of the second product, X3 of the third product. I want to sell them. So when I sell them, I will get 250 into X1 plus 180 into X2 plus 300 into X3. That's the money I will realize by selling the 3 products. And obviously, I want to produce quantities X1, X2, X3 in such a manner that at the end of the day, I want to make as much money as I can. So I want to maximize this 250 X1 plus 180 X2 plus 300 X3. All right? If you have any question, just stop me. Try to explain it. Suppose I just give this function and ask you to maximize. What is the value? X1 equal to infinity, X2 equal to infinity, X3 equal to infinity. Function money is equal to infinity. So given a choice, I would make an infinite amount of the 3 products, sell them and make an infinite amount of money. Because we have made an assumption that you can sell whatever you produce. So something is preventing me from producing that infinite amounts of the 3 products. What is preventing me? The availability of time on the 2 machines. So let's see how we model that. So if I produce X1, X2, X3, how much time I am using on the first machine? That is 10x1 plus 12x2 plus 15x3. Because we told that every unit requires 10, 12 and 15. Are we doing okay? So most of you know what this linear programming is? Sure? Can I go slightly faster? All right. So 10x1 plus 12x2 plus 15x3 should not exceed the 2400 that I have. Therefore, I put a less than or equal to. I don't put equal to. Equal to would mean that I have to use all the 2400. Nothing prevents me from leaving behind some time if it is beneficial. So I put a less than or equal to. I put an inequality there. Less than or equal to 2400. Similarly, 24x1 plus 14x2 plus 20x3 is less than or equal to 4800 because that is the time available on the second machine. All right? Fine? Fine. x1 and x2 to be greater than or equal to 0. You may find this unnecessary, you may find this redundant. Why should I write it explicitly? Don't I know that when I produce, I can produce only a positive quantity or not produce at all? I can't produce a negative quantity, which is what you are writing there by saying x1, x2 are greater than or equal to 0. Why this should be written explicitly and separately, we will see in a couple of minutes. But it's often written, always written, x1, x2 greater than or equal to 0. So this completes what is called the formulation of the problem. So what are the steps in formulation? Is this a linear programming problem? We'll answer these questions. So first thing we did was, we defined the variables. So these are called decision variables. So first step is to define a decision variable or a set of decision variables. After that, we wrote what is called the profit function or the revenue function, the money that we will get by selling, producing and selling, which is the objective of or the purpose of the whole thing. So it's called the objective function. So you write the objective function. And then you wrote those conditions, constraints, things that prevent us from getting that infinite amount of money. So those are the constraints. So we wrote the constraints. And finally, we put an explicit non-negativity on the variable. So it's called an explicit non-negativity. Now these are the 4 parts of formulation. So when you formulate a problem, you do these 4 things. Define the decision variable, write the objective function, write the constraint, put an explicit non-negativity on the variable. Oh, x3 I missed. So there is an x3. So used to doing a 2 by 2 problem that I forgot the x3. So x3 greater than or equal to 0. Please add that. Is this a linear programming problem? Yes. Why is it a linear programming problem is the next question. Now look at the objective function. It's a function of the 3 variables x1, x2, x3. Is it a linear function or is it not a linear function? It is a linear function. So the objective function is a linear function of the decision variable. First condition. If my revenue function was 250 x1 square plus 180 into root of x2 plus something into x3 cube, then it is not a linear function. Right? It's a linear function. Constraints are all linear. Linear inequalities, so they can be inequalities, they can be equations, but they are linear functions. The left hand side are linear functions. The equalities, the inequalities are linear inequalities. And then you have an explicit restriction. So this is called a linear programming problem. When the objective function is a linear function, that is the constraints are all linear inequalities or equations, then you get a linear programming. Now why do you want this x1, x2 greater than or equal to 0? Explicitly stated, the reason is this. Suppose I decide to make 10 of the first product and 10 of the second product. I am going to use 220 on the first machine and 380 on the second machine. So I have enough resources. I make money 250 into 10, 4,300. 10 of the first product, 10 of the second product satisfies x1, x2, x3 greater than or equal to 0. Suppose I make 300 of the second product, x2 is equal to 300. Okay? x2 is equal to 300. Or even take something simpler. Take x1 is equal to 200. So if you take x1 is equal to 200, time required on the first machine is 2000, time required on the second machine is 4800, still feasible. Suppose you take x1 equal to 300. So take x1 equal to 300, time required on the first machine is 3000, which exceeds. Correct? So, but x1 equal to 300 and x3 equal to minus 40. Repeat, x1 equal to 300 and x3 equal to minus 40 would still satisfy the first constraint. Correct? Fine, it would still satisfy the first constraint. It may not satisfy the second constraint, we will just leave that for a moment. Now go back to the revenue. x1 equal to 300 will give me 75,000, right, 75,000, and x3 equal to minus 40 will give me minus something. That 75,000 is realized by selling 300 in the market. What is the significance of that minus something? Right? Loss is 1, right? But someone's not, I'm not going to give money to the market. The point I am making is, while a positive x1 and a negative x3 can always be written to satisfy the constraint, they don't mean anything in practice. They are meaningless in practice. So linear programming problem always assumes that the decision variable should have an explicit non-negativity when sent. And then you will see how this non-negativity is actually going to help us solve this problem beautifully. Right? Okay. So this is the formulation. This is a linear programming problem. Very quickly, decision variable, subjective function, constraint. So we will move slightly fast now. How do I solve it? So it's called linear programming problem. They are all linear, they are correlated. How do we quickly solve it? I'm going to go slightly fast because I may at this I'm going slow, so may not be able to do the entire thing. I'll try to do slightly. How do I solve this? Let's assume for a moment that we don't know how to solve this. Or at least I don't know how to solve this. So I'm just wondering how do I do this. Now there are three parts to this problem: the objective function, the constraints, and the non-negativity. I look at only the constraints right now and I find inequalities and I don't know how to solve inequalities. I have been taught how to solve equations. So what do? I try to make these inequalities as equations by adding some variables. So I add another x4 and x5 to that and then try to make it, just look at the constraints alone, plus x4 equal to 2400 plus x5 equal to this, sorry, this x1, x2 greater than equal to 0 keeps repeating. There should be an x3 also. I think the cut and paste has come to play, so it will keep repeating. So everywhere you have to put an x3 greater than equal to 0. In this case x4, x5 also greater than or equal to 0. What is nice is when I add an x4 and make it an equation, because the first constraint has to be satisfied, x4 will automatically become greater than or equal to 0. x5 also becomes greater than or equal to 0. Already x1, x2, x3 are greater than equal to 0, therefore I like this x4, x5 becoming greater than or equal to 0. Therefore, I don't put a minus x4 and say x4 less than or equal to 0. I don't do that. Because already x1, x2, x3 are greater than equal to 0, it makes it convenient for me to put a plus x4 and then say x4 is also greater than or equal to 0 than the other one. So now I have 5 variables, all of them are greater than equal to 0, and this x4 and x5 right now don't have a meaning, they are not products, they are just variables that have been brought in. Later we will try to give a meaning to that, but at the moment I can't, they don't represent products that I can go and sell, therefore their revenue component is 0. I don't realize any money by selling, or I can't do anything with this x4 and x5. Only x1, x2, x3 are products which can be sold, so they don't contribute anything, so they are 0. So what I have done is I have written the constraints now as equations. But then I realized that something else has happened. There are 5 variables and there are 2 equations. And once again, my high school maths has taught me that I can solve only for two variables if I have two equations and hope to get a solution, because there are so many other things, infinite solution, no solution, unique solution, all that. So I'll pray that I will get a solution, but I can solve only for two variables. How do I convert a 5 variable 2 equation system? Already I have put extra variables, right? They are equations. I can solve only for two variables, correct? But there are 5 variables. So this 5 variable 2 equation system will become a 2 variable 2 equation system if I fix the remaining 3 variables to some value, correct? If I just fix some variables to some value, it will become a 2 by 2 system. I don't know what value to fix, therefore I fix them at 0. And there are nice ways of theoretically showing that 0 is the correct way to fix, but in the interest of time, we will assume that we will fix them at 0 and we start solving. So there are 5 variables and 2 equations. We are going to solve for 2 variables by fixing the remaining 3 to 0. That's going to be the principle in which we will try to solve this problem. So the variables that I am going to solve for are called basic variables. The variables that I fix at 0 are called non-basic variables. So any 2 I can solve for and fix the other 3 to 0. Simple permutation combination tells us it can be done in 5C2 ways. 5 variables, pick any 2 in 5C2 ways, put the other 3 to 0 and solve for these. So the easiest thing to do for me is, when I look at these equations, is fix x1, x2, x3 to 0, so that I get a very nice solution. X4 equal to 2400, x5 is equal to 4800. The maths of it is easy, correct? The maths of it, with absolute minimum computational effort, I can get that. On the other hand, if I put x3, x4, x5 to 0, then I have to do some little tweaking to get the value of x1 and x2. Correct? So I do the easiest thing. I put x1, x2, x3 to 0. I get x4 equal to 2400, x5 to 4800. The nice thing about putting x1, x2, x3 to 0 and beginning is, if I had written this correctly, this should have become x1, x2, x3, x4, x5 greater than equal to 0. And the way this problem is, x4 equal to 2400, x5 equal to 4800 will automatically satisfy my non-negativity constraint. So I don't have to worry about satisfying the third piece. I'm going to call 3 pieces. One is the objective function, the constraint, the non-negativity. So I don't worry about that because it anyway satisfies that. So I start by saying x4 equal to 2400, x5 is equal to 4800, the rest of them are 0. So I write this as this. x4 and x5 are the variables that I am going to solve. So x4 is equal to 2400 minus 10x1 minus 12x2 minus 15x3. x5 is equal to 4800 minus 24x1 minus 14x2 minus 20x3. Z is my revenue, 250x1 plus 180x2 plus 300x3 plus 0x4 plus 0x5. So in the last set that I have written, if I put x1, x2, x3 to 0, I get x4 is 2400, x5 is 4800, Z is the revenue. How much revenue I get? 0. So what appeared as a beautiful starting solution, very simple and elegant, mathematically so simple, physically does not give me anything because I am not producing anything, I am not getting any revenue. Remember, I want to maximize that. So what do? I look at x1, x2, x3, this is 0, all these are 0, but I look at x1, x2, x3, this is 0. So I want to increase this Z. So x1, x2, x3 are currently 0. So I now start bringing them into the solution so that I start making these products that actually give me the revenue. I do it one at a time. That's the essence of the simplex algorithm. I just bring variables one at a time. I don't bring variables more than one at a time. So I want to bring x1, x2 or x3 into the solution. Which one will I bring first? Well, look at the function. X, x3, reason 300. So the 300 is kind of telling me if I produce one x3, I can make 300 rupees. If I make one x2, I can get 180 rupees. If I make one x1, I get 250. So I follow a slightly greedy, and being computer science, you know that term. So I follow the greedy approach of trying to bring that variable which has the largest unit contribution. So this is called largest coefficient rule. But theoretically, nothing prevents me from actually starting with x1 or x2. Nothing prevents me, just that my little greed not in the greedy English sense, but the greedy computational sense, makes me believe that I have to put x3 into the solution. Now I look at these two. As I keep increasing this x3, if I put x3 equal to 1, this becomes 4,780. As I put x3 equal to 1, this becomes 2,385. As I just keep increasing x3, I realize that x4 and x5 are all reducing. And I obviously want to make more money, so I just keep putting this x3 as much as I can till the first of these will become 0. One of them will approach 0 faster than the other. So which one will approach 0 first? The first one will allow x3 to go up to 15 15s are 225, 15 16s are 240. So it will allow x3 to go up to 160. Okay? The second one will allow x3 to go up to 240. So which one will become 0 first? The first one will become 0 first. So if I put x3 and try to increase it above 160, what will happen? This will become negative, which I don't want to happen. Therefore, I stop there and say that x3 will come into the solution and take a maximum value of 160. All right? Once I know that x3 is coming into the solution and it's going to knock off x4 from the solution. Now x4 will become 0. So I rewrite the equation. So I just rewrite the equation and do that. So x3 comes into the solution. The best value is 160. x3 replaces x4, and now I write this equation. x4 is, this is the old one. So look at the first equation and rewrite it. So the first equation is rewritten as 15x3 equal to 2400 minus 10x1 minus 12x2 minus x4. And write it like this, x3 is equal to. Don't put a coefficient, x3 is equal to, which is what I have shown in that blue color. This is simple. So once I know x3 is equal to something, go back to the other equation, x5 equation, and substitute for x3. So when you go back and substitute for x3, I have shown the thing completely. So I get 1600 minus this plus minus. I go to the z equation and substitute for x3. I get 48,000 plus 50x1 minus 60x2 minus 20x4. Okay? Any questions? All right? Right. So now what is my solution? x3 is equal to 160. x5 equal to 1600, revenue is 48,000, 160 into 300 is 48,000. So I have one solution which says now make 160 of the first product. What is the most defining moment up to this step? The most defining moment up to this step was actually the previous one, where I found out this value. As I increased x3, I realized that this is reducing, and I chose x3 such that the first variable comes to 0. That's the most defining moment. And what in the problem gave us the defining moment, this non-negativity. That's why this non-negativity is a very integral part of the linear programming problem. Because of that non-negativity, I said I can't increase x3 up to infinity. As I keep increasing x3, x4 and xy are coming down. The first one to reach 0 is going to define the extent to which I can push this x3. Right? That's why this is very, very important. It's called the minimum ratio rule and all that. So now go back. So we have done this. So this is your solution. Now what does it mean? x1 is at 0, x2 is at 0, x4 is at 0. Go back and substitute 0, x3 is 160, x5 is 1600. Now I want to increase, I want to produce more if I can and increase it further. So I look at this function and I realize that now this x1, if I produce, the profit can go up. If I produce x2, the profit will come down. And if I produce x4, there is no producing x4. So if I increase x4, the profit will come down. So what do? I try to bring x1 into the solution. So when I bring x1 into the solution, this tells me that as I bring x1 into the solution, x3 is going to reduce. Don't worry about the fact that x3 is the product that has the highest margin and all that. So the moment you start writing equations, algebra takes over. The algebra does not understand that x3 is a product that is being sold, x5 is something that is not being sold. It doesn't understand. It just gives the value 300 to that x3 and 0 to x5. Mathematically, I am correct. That's all. All right. So let's quickly forget that x3 is a product that's going to be sold and all that. So as I keep increasing x1, x3 is going to reduce. So how much this will allow x1 to go up? Quickly. 1000? This one? How did you get that? X1 is 1460. X1 is into the solution. So how much can x1 increase? X1 can go up to 240. This will become 0. 160 divided by 2 by 3. 160 into 3 by 2 will give you 240. Here again, as I keep increasing x1, x5 is going to reduce. So this is going to allow x1 up to 150. 1600 into 3 by 32, 53s are 150. Are we doing fine? So this is going to allow x1 up to 240, this is going to allow x1 up to 150. So which is the defining equation? The second one, the 150. So now write x1 in terms, bring it to the other, flip it and bring it to the other side. I've just written it again, so x1 is 150 plus. And the moment I write x1 equal to this, go back and put it in the other equation. So x3 is equal to 160 minus 2 by 3 x1, etc. Simplification gives you x3 is equal to 60 minus. Go back again and substitute in the previous z equation. Previous equation, 48,000 plus 50 into this plus this. You get 55,500 minus this. Now what is the solution at this point? Produce 150 of the first product and produce 60 of the third product. Doesn't matter. I make more money. Earlier I was not producing the first one. I was making slightly lesser. Now I produce this, I get 55,000. So again I want to increase it. Now I look at this function and say that x2 is the product. So if I increase x2, x2 is at 0. If I increase x2, what happens? Negative coefficient, the money comes down. x4 is at 0. If I increase x4, what will happen? Comes down. x5 is at 0. If I increase x4, x5 comes down. I can still increase this by decreasing x2, x4 and x5. Mathematically it is correct. But all of them are at 0, therefore I cannot decrease them, because if I decrease them, what will happen? I will violate the non-negativity. Now you see the importance of that. So I don't do that. The algorithm stops by telling you that the answer is x1 equal to 150, x3 equal to 6. Now this is called the algebraic form of the simplex algorithm. Most of the times you may not have come across this form. You would have seen the tabular form. This is, in my opinion, this is the best way to understand the simplex algorithm, not to do it and get an answer. Right? Now you hopefully you feel that, well, there is an order that you have seen, there is a purpose, why we do everything, so you get the answer. This is called the algebraic form of the simplex. This is the final answer. Pause. Any question? Then you have a slightly different problem. Time permits, we'll do that. I have an example. We'll do that. What you do there is, hopefully when it comes, I'll try to go slightly faster. The only problem is, this is something which is done, and if I'm teaching an undergrad class, the question that you ask will come in the next lecture or whatever. So, and we have time only for one lecture today. We'll try to do that. Okay, then we ask a quick question. We produced x1 and x3. We did not produce x2. Why did we not produce x2? Right? Less profit. Less profit seems to be the most intuitive answer, not necessarily the correct answer all the time. The reason being, if these coefficients were, instead of 12 and 14, they were 2 and 4, for all you know, you would have produced 60. So least profit seems to be the obvious intuitive answer, but not necessarily. So we'll try to answer that question right now. Now we associate a value or a worth for each resource. The two machines, the time on the machines, we associate a worth. So let's call this worth y1 and y2. And we will assume that these resources are actually converted to the product. You may ask a question, I need material to make these products, and those are not there. You can assume that infinite amount of material is available, and anything that is available at an infinite amount doesn't have a value. Right? So what is limiting, what are posing the constraints are the ones that will have value. So we will call them as y1 and y2. Since these resources have been converted to products, the total revenue that you get at the end should be equal to the total worth of the resource. Fine? Right. Now with this background, we'll quickly go. So when we produce, the unit revenue should be equal to the unit worth. So I produce A. So 10y1 plus 24y2 is equal to 250. 250 is the unit revenue I get by selling A. A is requiring 10 units of the first machine and 24 units on the second machine. So the worth is 10y1 plus 24y2. It should be equal to 250. I produce the third product. So 15y1 plus 20y2 is 300. Solving, you will get y1 is 55 by 4, y2 is 75 by 16. Sorry, you get some slightly inconvenient fractions, but it's okay. You're all computer science people, so it's okay to work with small numbers, fractions, and things like that. Total worth will be 2,400 into 55 by 4 plus 4,800 into 75 by 16, which will give you that 55,500. So we compute a worth for these resources. It's a little more than what I have explained, but nevertheless, that's the motivation. Now the reason for not producing X2 is giving me a revenue of 180. What is the value of the worth it is consuming? It's consuming 12 into 55 by 4 plus 14 into 75 by 16. So it is consuming 1875 by 8, which is less than 180 by 405 by 8. I'm sorry, which is more than 180 by 405. So it can give me 180 when I sell it, but at the moment it will consume resources which is worth 1875 by 8, which is bigger than 180. Because it's consuming resources more than the profit it can give me, I don't proceed. But look at this 405 by 8. a nice number. Did we see it somewhere? We saw the 405 by 8 somewhere. You see the 405 by 8 under x2? Right? It's there somewhere. Right? What are the worth of the resources that we described now by solving? The worth is 55 by 4 and 75 by 16. Do you see those numbers here? 55 by 4 and 75 by 16. So they are all there somewhere. So the simplex not only solves the original problem, but also solves the worth problem. It also tries to answer why I don't produce X. So all these things it is doing. Fine. So in general, you want to find out y1 and y2 such that we wish to minimize the total value of the resources and yet try to use them to meet the unit price. Therefore, you will solve a slightly different problem. So if y1 and y2 are the unit worth, then the worth of the resource is 2400 y1 plus 4800 y2. And these worth should be such that when I actually produce the x1, x2, x3, the revenue should be equal to the worth. I should be able to get it. Therefore, worth of the thing is greater than or equal to revenue. So I get a different linear programming, which is the kind of problem that you want me to solve. It's a minimization problem with greater than or equal to condition. Now this problem is called the dual of the linear programming problem. And if you solve this dual, you will get 55 by 4, 75 by 16, and you will get a lot of theorems on duality and so on. A very nice topic to kind of learn and understand and appreciate. All the more when you start looking at some of the network problems which have relationships with computer science. The shortest path problem, I think that was done in the last session, as I could briefly see the slide that is used. You can easily show that your Dijkstra's algorithm is actually the solution to the dual of the shortest path problem. In fact, the very motivation of the Dijkstra's algorithm can come from that side. What you learn as a theorem, which will tell you something, right? When all cost, objective function or cost coefficients are greater than or equal to 0, then Dijkstra's algorithm will follow a certain property, right? That property comes from the primal dual of the linear program. We will see that when we do max flow a little later. So all these problems, min cost flow problem, maximum flow problem, assignment problem, which is nothing but your bipartite matching problem, right? All that. So all these are either linear programming problems or can be converted to linear programming problems. And most of the efficient algorithms that you actually do to make them faster computationally, particularly when you look at this shortest path problem, right? Wi minus Wj is less than or equal to Cij. What is that algorithm? The second algorithm that's usually done, no? Dijkstra's, huh? No, not true. Not proof. That's for spanning tree. Not flaw. Flaw before that. No, I'm just missing that. Where you do the label correction algorithm. Dijkstra's is label setting. Once you set the label, you don't change it. Bellman-Ford algorithm, where you do the label correction, right? Fine. Bellman-Ford is a direct application of the dual of the shortest path problem. And it depends on how you look at it. If you look at it more from a computational angle, then you describe these as theorems. But then what we try to do is we show them as OR problems and show that it's a dual. And then through the dual property, you can show that it is optimum. So there is a strong connection. All right. So it solves, okay, the simplex solves the given problem and its dual optimum. So that's the niceness of the simplex algorithm. Now let's quickly do a few more things. This is a tabular form. There are many tabular forms available. In fact, in some ways, the tabular form has become a certain, I don't know, for fear of being recorded, it's almost become a monster with so many types of notations coming and so many books using it and so on. You'll find Zj minus Cj, you'll find Cj minus Zj, you'll find a whole lot of things. But then if you quickly get a feel of the algebraic method, the tabular method comes naturally. This is one form. You may not normally see this form. If you open a textbook, you will see the form where there will be an identity matrix also. I have just left out the identity matrix portion. How do I do that? So that's one way to, okay, we'll, in the interest of time, we'll possibly skip the tabular form because we need to look at the matrix form, which is more important from the point of view of what we are doing here. So you do find the tabular form, at the end you will find all these numbers. You do the tabular form, this is a dual solution. This is why you don't produce X2, because the extent to which your profit will come down is 405 by 8, which is the difference between the revenue and the worth of the risk. So if you call it Cj minus Zj rho or Zj minus Cj rho, you will get these numbers. You will see that these are exactly the same numbers that you saw in the algebra. Fine, let's quickly do the matrix form. Very quickly, how do I write a computer program for simplex? So whatever we did in the algebraic form, I have just written that. So I will start putting an xb variable that I am solving, x4, x5 as my basic variable. So the moment I define x4, x5 I am solving, now what is called a basis matrix comes from the first one, it is an identity matrix, 1, 0, 0, 1. So the solution will be b into xb equal to small b is 2400, 4800. So the solution will be straight away 2400, 4008. Then I define another thing called y, which is actually the dual. So I write this equation yb is equal to cb, and y is equal to cb b inverse. But since b is identity matrix, b inverse is also an identity matrix, so y will become cb. What is cb? cb is the objective function coefficient of the basic variable. What are basic variables? The variables that you are right now solving, x4 and x5 to begin with. So what is their objective function coefficient? 0. Therefore y becomes 0. Now x4 and x5 I am solving for. I have to check whether x1, x2, x3 can come into the solution. Correct? I want to check whether they can come into the solution. How do I find out? In the algebraic form, what we did was, at this point we were here, I said x1 can come in because there is a positive, x2 can come in because there is positive, x3 can come in because it's positive. We chose x3 following a greedy approach. Now I don't substitute, I don't use substitution in the matrix method. I represent everything in the form of matrix form, multiplication, addition, subtraction, and so on. So what do? So what do? I do this. If I want to check whether variable x1 can come in, I do the c1 minus y into p. C1 is the objective function coefficient, 250. Y is 0, 0. P1 is 10, 24 from the first one, the first column, corresponding to variable x1 is called P1. So C1 minus YP1 is 250. Same number that you got there. C2 minus YP2 is 180. C3 minus YP3 is 300. All three can come in, but I choose that 300 because it is higher. And the moment I choose that, you remember I said we increase this x3 and then said something is going to come to 0. I just take the limiting value 2400 by 15, 4800. I look at this matrix and divide it by this matrix correspondingly to get the value. So everything I start doing in using matrices. Now you can see the slight difference. Now you see x3 and x5 have come into the solution. When x3, x5 comes into the solution, B is this matrix, 15, 25, 0, 1. Okay? So I have to do B inverse. Right now, I will do the old traditional way of cofactor adjoint if I do it in the class. Then I find B inverse. Then I find B inverse B. And like this, I can write a computer program till I get the end of the algorithm. No problem. Why am I taking the trouble to do this? Right? The answer comes here. So I have just shown the whole process. So finally the algorithm will terminate giving you the same answer. Okay. Before I go to the computational issues, I will look at this. I think she wanted me to do this. Yeah. What are the other issues? What are the variations? If I have a problem like this, where I have a minimization, I have greater than or equal to constraint, this is what you wanted me to look at. If I take the first inequality and try to make it an equation, I have a conflict. I can either say 3x1 plus 5x2 minus x4 is equal to 34 because of second constraint with x4 greater than or equal to 0. Or 3x1 plus 5x2 plus x4 is equal to 34 with x4 less than or equal to 0. I have a conflict. I stick to that variable being greater than or equal to 0 because that's going to define my limiting value in the simplex. Therefore, I put minus x4 equal to 34 with x4 greater than or equal to 0. But the moment I put minus x4 equal to 34, I cannot start simplex with x4 is equal to minus 34 because it violates my non-negative. So I have to do something. Right? So there are two methods, which is called two-phase method, Big M method. There is also a dual simplex algorithm. So there are three ways of solving it. Dual simplex alone we will see now quickly because you raised that question. I'll do it quickly. I won't spend too much time on it. So let's start this problem and do it by the dual simplex algorithm. Oh God. This should be equal to 8. This should be equal to 37. Sorry, again one more typo. Should be equal to 8. I've already added the variable x3. Equal to 8. So I cannot start with x3, x4 because they are violating my non-negativity. But dual simplex algorithm will still start with that. So it will start with that and it will tell you x3 is equal to minus 8 plus x1 plus x2, x4 equal to minus 34 plus 3x1 plus 5x2, z is equal to 0. Now I have a solution that is not feasible. I want to make that solution feasible. So what I do is I do something which is slightly opposite of what I did in simplex. Now both are infeasible. So any one I have to make it feasible. I choose the one which is most negative. I choose the one which is most negative, so I choose this. I can make this feasible by increasing x1 or by increasing x2. But then I realize that as far as the rate of increase is concerned, I will observe that this is going to increase at 4 by 3, this is going to increase at 1 division. I do the opposite, division. So I start putting x2 into the solution. Right? I start with x2 into the solution. So when I put x2 into the solution, I straight away switch and see what happens. When I put x2 into the solution, to make it feasible, one of them has to leave. We push out x4, x2 comes in because the rate of increase is smaller. Because it's a minimization problem, rate of increase is smaller, so I do that. Minimum of 4 by 3, 5 by 5. So I put x2 into the solution, I get this. 5x2 is equal to 34 minus 3x1 minus x4, x2 is equal to this. Now you see, feasibility has come. I go back and substitute in x3, I get this, it's still infeasible. Now this is slightly irrelevant, but I get 34 plus x1 plus x2. Now this is infeasible, I want this to be feasible, so this goes out, x3 goes out, and therefore I have to increase either x1 or x4. Again I look at the rate, 1 divided by 2 by 5 is 5 by 2, 1 divided by 1 by 5 is 5, 5 by 2 is smaller, therefore x1 comes into the solution. So when x1 comes into the solution, I get this. I get 3 plus 5 by 2. Go back and substitute, x2 is 5 minus something. So z is this. Both are feasible and I get the 35. So this is dual simplex. This is the algebraic form of dual simplex. Alright? Right. Now go back. Okay. What are the limitations in simplex? Simplex is a beautiful algorithm. There is a computational aspect, I haven't come into that. Let's even look at the mathematics of the simplex. Somebody created this problem, this linear programming problem, which is shown on the left. I think Beal or somebody created that. There are very few examples like this. And when you actually start simplex, what would you do? There are already 4 variables. So you would add up x5, x6 and x7 and start simplex with x5, x6, x7. Start simplex with x5, x6, x7. Remember, we greedily put in that variable which has the largest contribution. It's called the largest coefficient rule. So if you apply the largest coefficient rule and continue with simplex, sometimes this minimum ratio can hurt us if your right hand side is 0, because 0 divided by any number becomes 0. So it starts hurting us when you have 0 on the right hand side, and you quickly realize that 2 out of the 3 constraints actually have 0 on the right hand. So the minimum increase will be 0, because 0 divided by something. So you can push out any variable. So if you start doing it, you will actually end up with, start with x5, x6, x7. Next iteration x1, x6, x7, x1, x2, x7. Like that it will come, and it will come back to x5, x6, x7. So simplex will try to get into an infinite loop and will not terminate, because you see it comes back to the same base. Ordinarily it should not come back to the same base. Ordinarily for a maximization the values should keep increasing. The values, when they keep increasing, it will never come back to the same basis, because a previous basis will give a lesser value. So the increasing becomes non-decreasing. Non-decreasing stays in the same value because of that 0. So the objective function stays in the same value and does not increase. It stays at 0, and after the 7th iteration comes back to the same. So this was one serious limitation of the simplex algorithm. Till Bland solved it, called Bland's rule or smallest subscript rule. There is also a lexicographic rule. So Bland's rule will tell you that when you are pushing out a variable or when you are bringing in a variable, consistently use a variable with the smallest subscript. There is a nice proof for it, which is beyond the time that we actually have. So it's a very simple rule. The proof is a little hard. Lexicographic, the proof is easy. It takes more time to implement it. So people would implement Bland's rule, and then Bland's rule will give you the answer with z equal to 5 by 6. So the one limitation of the simplex algorithm is what is called cycling, where you start with a basis, which means a set of variables in the solution, and after a set of iterations, it comes back to the same basis, which it normally should not be. Therefore, there will be termination issues. So termination issues are overcome by using smallest subscript rule, or also called Bland's rule. Right. Now last couple of slides that we have here. How do you make simplex algorithm faster and better? I guess that's the purpose for which we are sitting here. So what are the things that it does? One, given a problem, it takes a certain amount of memory, and then it takes a certain amount of time. So you need to look at both these aspects. Memory, what happens is people did many things on the memory front. I'll just tell you a few things which are here. Sometimes what happens is, if you do the, why did we take so much trouble to do the matrix method and the tabular form and the algebraic form? I said algebraic form is the best way to understand. Obviously not the way to implement it in a computer program, because you keep writing minus x1, minus x2. What does the tabular form do? You don't keep writing this minus x1, minus x2 everywhere. You put x1, x2, x3 under that and tries to bring a matrix. So if you do this, see this tabular form, for every iteration, if you see this, for every iteration, I am actually, this is a very condensed form. The original tabular form also has an identity matrix. So for every iteration I am doing some kind of, this is 2 constraints. So m is 2 plus 1, 3. So m plus 1 into, actually speaking, n plus 1, because I will have an identity matrix here. I will be storing m plus 1 into n plus 1 value if I store the identity matrix. If I do the matrix method, which I have shown here, the B inverse that I am assuming I am storing B inverse as B inverse, I am storing m square value, right? M is the number of equations constraint, so m square value, plus some n plus m plus something. So I can easily show that if I do the matrix method, I store lesser values than I would store if I did the tabular method. So that way I try to save on memory by storing relevant values and not all the values. Second thing is, suppose I have this problem. Yes, look at the first problem. Suppose I also put x1 less than or equal to 100. Okay, if I put x1 less than or equal to 100 as a fourth constraint, a third constraint, so now I have 3 constraints. Remember, at every iteration what I am doing? I am doing a B inverse B, correct, in the matrix method. I am solving for 3 variables, so I am inverting a 3 by 3 matrix essentially, correct. Solving a 3 by 3 equation is equivalent to inverting a 3 by 3 matrix and multiplying by the right answer. So I do a 3 by 3. But before all this, let us look at this. A large linear programming problem has about, standard linear programming problems solved today, not even today, 25 years ago, were all 1 million variables, 500,000 constraints and so on. This 2 and 3 is only for class and understanding and experience. So even a reasonable sized linear programming problem has about 50,000 variables and so on. Right? That's the thing that we are talking about. Why so much? Even traveling salesman problem, people talk of solving more than 1,000 cities and so on. Right? So that's the size. So if each of these variables has that x1 less than or equal to, it's called a bound on the variable. So if each one of these variables has a bound, then I have another 500,000 constraints. Now do I want to invert a 500,000 by 500,000 matrix, or do I want to invert a 1 million by 1 million matrix? Which one do you want to invert? The 500,000 by 500,000, right? What is the complexity of matrix inversion? If I have a 3 by 3 order of cube, the computational effort is cube of the size of the matrix that we are doing. All right. So I don't want to invert a 1 million by 1 million. I would rather do a smaller. So what happens is, when you have these bounds, you take these bounds away separately and then use it. So you don't bring it as an extra constraint. So simplex method is modified for bounded variables. So when I have bounded variables, I modify simplex. So I use matrix method, I use bounded variables. Now there are other things. There is called column generation. If I have a large problem, I don't even store the entire problem, because my problem itself is large. So as I keep iterating in simplex, I don't pick a column from somewhere, because picking a column would mean picking some 50,000 to 100,000 values from somewhere. So what I do is, at the times I solve a subproblem to generate the column. So those are called column generation methods to save memory, but at the same time there is some speed element that comes in. Then I do decomposition. If I have a large linear programming problem, and I can decompose them into smaller problems. For example, I have 100 variables, and all the 100 variables come in some 5 constraints. The remaining, not all variables come, some variables come. So if I simply pull out these last 5 constraints, they become 5 different linear programming problems. Right? I hope I'm making sense. So what happens is, if I can decompose the problem, pull out a few constraints, and then it becomes not a single problem, but it has it can be decomposed into smaller LPs. Now these smaller LPs are solved, and then this set of constraints that has all the variables is used in an intelligent way to get the optimum solution. So you have what is called a decomposition algorithm to do that. So all these variations exist. Now if you come to attack the speed part, now there are two things. The time it takes to run the simplex algorithm depends on two things: time taken per iteration and the number of iterations. Right? Time taken per iteration and number of iterations. That is where the matrix method actually helps us. The moment you see the matrix method, you realize the most computationally intense portion is the matrix inverse. When I solve for x equal to B inverse B, that B inverse is the most computation intensive part of the whole thing. So how well can I invert a matrix is the first question. The algebraic method that we saw used substitution to solve. Substitution was the first way by which we were taught how to solve equations. Correct? As soon as we went to high school and all that, we were quickly taught B inverse B. So what did we do to get B inverse? 1 by determinant cofactor adjoint. As a computer science person, would you recommend that as a way to write a computer program? No? Can somebody remember the first computer program that you would have written to invert a matrix? What did you do? Which you would have read in some 12th standard basic program my son writes or somebody writes. How do they do? How do they do? Take a 2 by 2 equation. B, I, do those row column operations to get I here. What you get there is B inverse, multiply with the right hand. Correct? What is that method called? A slightly better name. That's the Gauss-Jordan method to invert a matrix. Then you learn what is called Gaussian elimination, where you convert the matrix into an upper triangular or a lower triangular form, and then through a process of substitutions you will get that. So you start applying all these methods, Gaussian elimination, characterize the matrix, the B matrix, either into a sparse matrix or a dense matrix, and depending on the density, use different methods to do that. One of the popular methods is called eta factorization of the basis. Sometimes you will do use triangular factorization, LU decomposition and all that. So all these things come in to make the matrix inversion, which is the key thing, as fast as possible. So a whole lot of efficient implementation centers around matrix inversion. I have given an example for eta factorization of the basis. Little for interest of time, I think it's difficult to do that. What you do in eta factorization essentially is, when I solve a set of equations, particularly here, when I solve a set of equations, if you go back to the matrix method, when we actually solve for x1, x3, what do I get? I get a B matrix where all the 4 elements are there. When I solve for x3 and x5, I had a B matrix where, because of x5, one of the columns was the identity column. When I started simplex, my first basis matrix was identity matrix. Correct? So whenever I start simplex, my first basis, which is called B0, is an identity matrix. After one iteration, what happens? One column is replaced by some other thing. So you define what is called an eta matrix, where an eta matrix is like an identity matrix with only one column different. All right? The moment I have an eta matrix where just one column is different, I can always solve by substitution. I don't have to explicitly invert. Bx equal to B, x equal to B inverse B, right? Automatically we write that. If your B itself is a lower triangular matrix, what will you do? You won't invert it. You will quickly do substitution and solve it. If the B itself is an eta matrix, what will you do? You will do substitution and solve it, which is faster than invert. So what you do is, if I am in the fifth iteration of simplex, I will have a dense matrix. But what I can, if that dense matrix is called B5, fifth iteration of simplex, B5 can be written as B0 into E1 into E2 into E3 into E4 into E5, where E1, E2, E3, E4, E5 are all eta matrices. And by definition, an eta matrix has an identity matrix with one column change, right? So, if I am actually solving for, just to make it easy, let's say I am solving for B2 equal to B, normally, or so x is equal to Bx, B equal to B inverse B, B2x is equal to B, x equal to B2 inverse B. Now this B2 will be written as E0, E1, E2, x is equal to B. Now what will happen? I will simply put E2x is equal to some u, okay, or whatever, I will use this, not E2 into x, E2 into u is equal to B. I know this B, I know this E2. So E2 into u is equal to B, so I find this u. Then I go back and multiply with E1. Okay. I don't know if I am making sense. Okay, let me try to explain it slightly better. Let's explain it. For example, I am solving this. I am solving for x3, x1. So I would have solved B2 is 15, 20, 10, 24. If I am not using the eta factorization of the basis, I would have simply inverted this 2 by 2 matrix by any other method. You can use that cofactor adjoint, whatever it is, and then multiply with 2400, 4800. For example, you could have explicitly computed this B inverse, right? And then multiply to get the value. Now what I do is, I'm in fact in eta factorization I won't do this. Let me do this. Now I have to find out why B2 is equal to CB. I have to find y. So what I will do, y1, y2 into this B2 is equal to CB. CB in this case will be 300, 250. That's the objective function coefficient, 300, 250. 300, 250. Now I won't use that B inverse. I won't use that because I have to do something to get that. And as the size is bigger, the effort is higher. So I am not going to use that B inverse. I am going to write this B2 as y1, y2 into B0, E1, E2 is equal to 300 into 250. B0 is identity, so leave it. So y1, y2 into E1, E2 is equal to 300 into 250. I have already stored the eta matrices somewhere else in these iterations. So I know this is my E1, this is my E2. Remember, these are eta matrices, non-identity column, non-identity column. So what I do is, instead of y E1, E2 is equal to CB, I use u into E2 is equal to CB. U is not known, E2 is known, CB is known. So U is written as U1, U2. This is an eta matrix. This is here. I don't invert. So this will give me U1 plus U2 is equal to 300, from which this is 300. And 2 by 3 U1 plus 32 by 3 U2 is equal to 250. I already know this 300. I'll do this. Only one place I have to substitute. Rest of them, it's a single thing. For example, you see here, U1 plus 0 U2 is 300, because the identity column gives me that flexibility. So I will get n minus 1 answers quickly. The last one I will use substitution and do it. So I solve for u. So u is 375 by 16. But I don't want u, I want y. Now what is the relationship? UE2 is equal to CB, which means u is equal to YE1. So YE1 is equal to u, y is Y1, Y2, E1 is an eta matrix. This is what I have calculated. So now look at the second one, 0 Y1 plus 1 Y2 equal to 75 by 16, I get this. Then go back and substitute 15 Y1 plus 20 Y2 is 300, from which I get 55 by 4. And I don't have to store the eta matrix like this every time. Eta matrix is stored as a column with just one indicator as to which column of the identity matrix is replaced. You would have done efficient ways of storing data, retrieving data, which is the central thing when you start talking of algorithms, right? How do I implement shortest path? How do I implement max flow, right? So you know how to do that. So eta matrix is not stored as a matrix. It's stored as a column vector with this and position 2. This is stored as column, this alone and position 1. The moment I know my position 1, then I know what equation to implement. So that's how you make it faster. Don't explicitly invert the matrix, right? Do this by using all these set of things and do that. So that is how simplex is made much faster than what is. Now some statistics. If I use the matrix method, if I use this is, if I use eta factorization of the basis, 32m plus 10n, where m is the number of constraints and n is the number of variables. Roughly, if I use the normal simplex, it's mn by 4. So when you have roughly m greater than 100, the moment you have more than 100 constraints, eta factorization of the basis will work faster than the normal matrix inversion based. Now this is like how much time or how many iterations would simplex take. Remember, that is time within an iteration where you do matrix inversion. So here, how many iterations does it take? So this is a literature taken from Avis and Swartl. So Swartl is again a familiar name in the computer science field. So they did a lot of experiments, and this is just one set of tables where they solved, and this is the number of iterations you get. If you use the largest coefficient rule, the greedy rule that we spoke about, this is the number of iterations on an average. You use what's called the largest increase rule, which means, remember, all three variables could have come in. Now I find out, I know the per unit contribution. Now if I put this, how much I can increase the variable, and the product is the increase in revenue. So find the increase in revenue before you do the iteration and choose that variable, which instead of giving the largest coefficient, gives the largest increase. So more computation is involved. Lesser iterations, fewer iterations, but more computation is involved. So largest increase rule gives fewer iterations, but largest coefficient rule, if you take computation and iteration, it's better. So people use largest coefficient. But what I am told is standard packages simply use first positive Cj minus Zj and so on. So these rules keep coming. Usually it takes of the order of 3m by 2 iterations, where m is the number of constraints. Okay, don't substitute m equal to 2 and say 1.5, but essentially 2, 3, whatever, for smaller problems. Roughly of the order of 3m by 2 iterations, rarely going up to 3. Is simplex a polynomially bounded algorithm? You know what is a polynomially bounded algorithm, right? Introduce some point. Kind of. To put it very simply, if I do the algebraic method of simplex, remember there are n variables and m equations. Because I have m equations, I can solve only for m variables at a time. So these m variables are chosen in NCM base. So the worst case, I will have NCM iteration. And NCM is not a tens to something, So it's not a polynomially bounded algorithm. The running time is not a polynomial function of m and n. Then somewhere people introduced what are called Klee and Minty problems. Klee and Minty introduced that problem. That's a general form of the Klee and Minty problem. This is the Klee and Minty problem with 3 variables. So if you solve the Klee and Minty problem with 3 variables, it will take 7 iterations. If you use the largest coefficient rule, it will take 7 iterations. If you solve a Klee and Minty problem with 4 variables, it will take 15 iterations. In general, it will take 2 to the power n minus 1 iteration. And 2 to the power n is not a nice number, not a polynomial in n. So people had this criticism of simplex that it is not a polynomially bounded algorithm in the worst case. Some interesting things also happen. Actually, there are some nice things. If you use the same, instead of using the largest coefficient rule, if you use the largest increase rule, you will solve it in 1 iteration. But then if Klee and Minty created a counterexample for the largest coefficient rule, somebody created a counterexample for the largest increase rule and said, if I use this rule, it will take that. You can actually do some scaling of the variables. You can replace x1 equal to 0.01, y1, x2 equal to y2, scale the variables 1 iteration. But these are all theoretical examples, counter examples, so they will work with certain ways. But what is important is this. Given a rule, it is always possible to create a problem that will require 2 to the power n minus 1 iteration. Is there a rule for which I cannot create a problem? Is the open question. That's an open challenge for the mathematics, computer science people who work on the simplex algorithm. Later, of course, polynomially bounded algorithms came. The ellipsoid algorithm and the Karmarkar's algorithm are examples of that. Particularly the Karmarkar's algorithm came in 1984, which is created for linear programming. The only thing is they are very complicated and complex to do it in class or to explain. Even a simple 2 by 2 will take a lot of time to explain how these methods work, but they eventually work and they have proved that both these have polynomial time complexity. That's where we are at the end of this session. Any questions?